The morning sun broke over Dust Creek like a tired promise. All light and no warmth. Dust spiraled through the air as boots shuffled across the auction yard, and the cracked timbers of the corral groaned like old bones beneath the weight of another desperate day. Ellis Harlan stood just outside the fence line, the brim of his weathered hat casting a shadow over eyes that hadn't seen real sleep in weeks. 36 years old and worn thin as saddle leather, he looked like a man halfway between hope and surrender. His shirt clung to him with sweat and stubbornness, and in the palm of his calloused hand lay the last of what his life had come to, $2.75. That's all the future he had left, his farm, little more than a patch of baked earth and bad memories, was dying. The well was dry, the wheat had failed, and the bank had circled like vultures, eager to pick at what ounce remained. Without a working horse, Ellis wouldn't make it through the next season, and winter didn't wait for sorry men. He watched as the bidding roared around glossy-coated stallions and strong-legged mares. $20, $30, $45. These animals gleamed with muscle and health, and each one walked away with a new owner, their hooves clicking like coins against the boards. Ellis didn't move. He didn't speak. He just waited, because he knew those horses weren't for men like him. Then he saw it. At the far end of the lot, penned off in a narrow corner barely touched by sunlight, stood something that looked more ghost than horse. The crowd gave it a wide berth, as if even proximity might bring bad luck. A few whispered. Others spowed and muttered curses under their breath. It was the ugliest animal Ellis had ever seen, and the most extraordinary. Its body was long and lean, but covered in an uneven coat that seemed part ash, part shadow. The bony ridge of its spine was marked with a jagged streak of hairless skin, like lightning had struck it and left a scar for the world to see. One eye shimmered silver gray, cold and distant. The other burned amber like coals buried deep in the hearth. A ring of white fur clung to its neck, like frosty, while its back darkened into the char of a long-dead fire. Its right ear was torn clean in half, the exposed cartilage blackened and gnarled like wood struck by rot. And on its left flank, bare of fur, lay a swirl of pinkish skin, patterned in a perfect spiral that looked less like a wound and more like a symbol, a mark left by something that didn't belong to this world. Ash mark, someone called it. That's the ash mark horse, a man near Ellis muttered, branded by fire or cursed by it. Either way, no man should ride that thing. Ellis said nothing. He stepped closer. The animal didn't move, didn't blink. It simply watched him with those two impossible eyes, not scared, not angry, just easy watching, like it recognized something in him that the rest of the world had long forgotten. Gideon Mears, the auctioneer, gave the horse a dismissive wave. This one here's a charity case, been sitting for days and won't eat, won't whinny, won't nothing. Most folks say it's half spirit, half plague, starting at $2. Anyone to silence, $1.50 hell. Just take it off my hands. The laughter that followed was quiet, but it cut just the same. Ellis looked down at the coins in his hand. Then he looked at the horse, and the horse looked back. $2.50, Ellis said. Voice steady, heads turned. One man chuckled, another snorted. Gideon blinked. You serious, son? Ellis nodded once. Dead serious. A pause, then the slap of Gideon's gavel against the post, dulled to the gentleman with more grit than sense. He said, May God help him. Ellis walked to the pen. The horse didn't shy away. As he reached for the rope, its head dipped, just slightly. Not submission, not trust. Something older, something like understanding. And for the first time in months, Ellis felt something stir beneath the weight of all that loss. Not hope, but the shape of it. The trail home shimmered with heat. The dust hung lazy in the air, and the weight of silence pressed as heavily on Ellis's shoulders as the sun did on his back. He led the strange creature behind him, its hooves barely disturbing the earth, its breath steady and untroubled. It didn't fight the rope. It didn't balk. But at every fork in the road, every turn that veered away from the rising shadow of El Cielo, it stopped, dead still, ears pricked forward, eyes fixed on the mountains like it had heard something only it understood. The first time, Ellis tugged gently. "Come on now, this way." The second time, he frowned. "Ain't nothing up there but snakes and regrets." The third time, he stopped altogether. The horse had turned its head, looked at him, that same unblinking stare, that mix of patience and urgency, and something else, something ancient, as if the thing inside this horse had seen more than Ellis ever would. "You got a memory stuck in those bones, don't you?" Ellis muttered. El Cielo, the heaven ridge, a cruel name for a place soaked in sorrow. Stories clung to it like cobwebs. Gold mine gone bad. Cave-in buried 27 men. No bodies ever recovered. Some said the mountain took them as payment. Others said the gold was cursed. Ellis had grown up hearing those stories. He never cared for them. But right now, walking this path, he felt them. Ash didn't forget. That much was clear. When they finally reached the edge of Ellis's land, the wind shifted. The air turned dry and metallic, like the breath of something waiting underground. The barn came into view, a crooked skeleton leaning on one leg, more holes than roof. The house beyond it slouched under its own weight. Ellis led the horse into the barn. The light filtered in through warped slats, stripes of gold dust cutting across the darkness. He tied the rope loosely to a beam and set to work. Water first, then oats. The motions were familiar, even comforting. But the silence behind him pressed closer with every step. When he turned, Ash hadn't moved. It stood at the far end of the stall, facing the back wall, facing the mountain, as if the boards between them weren't even there. Ellis leaned on the door frame. "You gonna eat, or just stand there remembering?" No response, just the soft sound of wind outside, just the stillness. He left the barn, but not without looking back. That night, the wind howled like something searching. Ellis lay on his narrow bed, the ceiling sagging above him. He listened to the night, to the creaks of wood, to the distant rustle of leaves, and to something else, something that felt less like sound and more like memory. That horse, he thought. It was listening. No, not just listening, waiting. For what? Ellis didn't know, but he had a feeling that whatever it was, it wasn't done with either of them yet. The wind changed sometime after midnight. It wasn't loud, just a shift in the air. A subtle difference Ellis Harlan couldn't explain, but felt in his bones. He sat up in bed, heart drumming without rhythm. The cabin was still, too still. He listened. Nothing. No hoof against the stall post. No faint breath from the barn. Just the heavy hush of something that had passed through and left effluence in its wake. He rose, grabbed his lantern and rifle, and stepped into the dark. The barn door creaked on its hinge. Inside, the stall stood open. The rope lay curled like a shed snake. No kicked boards, no scattered hay, just absence. Ash. Ellis called softly. The name echoed once and faced it. No answer. Tracks led north, carved clean into the soft dust from the storm that had passed days before, straight and sure toward El Cielo. Of course it would be that way. Ellis saddled his mule with what gear he could carry and set out while the moon still hung low and gold above the peaks. The trail was rough, winding through broken rock and thorny brush, but the hoofprints never wavered. Ash hadn't bolted in fear. He was leading, again. They climbed through old cattle paths and half-washed mining roads long abandoned, where ghosts of wagons and weary men still lingered in rusted nails and twisted rails. As dawn brushed the sky in copper, Ellis saw him. Ash stood on a slab of granite halfway up a ridge, still, waiting. His head turned slightly as Ellis approached, then lowered to the ground. With slow, steady rhythm, he began to scrape the earth with his front hoof. Not panicked, not wild, just digging. Deliberate. Ellis watched for a moment, then dropped to his knees and began to help. The ground was loose here, the way wind and time had softened it. Together they pushed away years of dust and gravel, until something hard knocked against Ellis's fingers. He brushed aside the dirt and found wood gray with age. Framed in iron hinges rusted to orange lace, a trapdoor. Lord above, Ellis muttered. He gripped the iron ring. It shrieked in protest as he pulled. The door gave way, inch by inch, until a yawning darkness opened beneath them. A tunnel. The air that escaped smelled of rotten metal. Cold, like something preserved too long underground. He lifted the lantern and lowered himself onto the old ladder. The rungs held barely. Ash remained above, his silhouette framed against the rising sun. Watching, Ellis reached the bottom and stepped into a narrow shaft carved through the rock. Thick wooden beams held the weight of stone overhead. Some bowed with age, others blackened by fire. The tunnel stretched ahead into deeper shadow. He moved slowly. Lantern raced. The walls glittered faintly with veins of quartz and something darker. Then came the first shell-casing brass, dented, half buried in the silt. Then another. Then a scatter of bones, small ones, broken and dry. He passed a boot curled in on itself with rot. Shards of glass. A collapsed support beam. The marks of picnic, of men who had not left by choice. Further in, Ellis found a scorch mark across the tunnel wall, wide, black, radiating outward like an explosion had torn through here. Beyond it, against the far corner, a box. Metal, battered, partially melted. Inside lay a bundle of papers, charred along the edges. Most were unreadable, but one page remained whole enough to make out. A letter. To whoever finds this. My name is R. Calloway. We went deeper than we should have. Past the second fork. Through the marked wall. We thought it was just ore, high grade. Pure. But it wasn't. It mouthed. The vein pulsed. We felt it breathe. It isn't dead. And it isn't just gold. It's alive in the stone. And angry. We tried to extract it. The mine collapsed. Men vanished. Not just buried, gone, as if swallowed. I believe there's a way to reach it again. A live vein. But it won't open without the guardian. The marked beast. It knows the way. It remembers. If you've found the horse with the scar, the spiral, follow it. Trust it. It's the key. God help you. Ellis stood frozen. His hand trembled. The letter wilting in his grip. The scar. The spiral. The memory in the animal's eyes. Ash hadn't just wandered into that auction yard by chance. He was looking for someone, or waiting. The lantern flickered. From above, the faintest sound drifted down, a soft snort. Then silence. Ellis tucked the letter into his coat, turned, and slowly made his way back up the ladder. As he turned to leave the mine, Ellis paused at a shallow alcove carved into the wall, where time had half hidden a canvas satchel beneath a layer of dust and rock fragments. Curious, He brushed it open, and his breath caught. Inside were 3 silver dollars, heavy, unmarked, aged but unspoiled by time. He turned one over in his hand. No mint mark, no date, just pure weight and old silence. He hesitated. Taking them felt like reaching into a grave. But he also knew what waited above the need to secure what he'd found before others came looking. Ellis pocketed the coins carefully, not for spending, for claiming. Ash, waiting at the top of the ridge, gave no protest as Ellis climbed back into the morning light, a little heavier in the heart and the pocket. When he emerged into the light, Ash was still there, still watching. The mountain wind caught his mane, tossing white and black strands like smoke and snow. His eyes, silver and amber, met Ellis's, and something passed between them. Not speech, not even thought, just knowledge. This was only the beginning, and the ground beneath their feet was not yet done whispering. The mountain had its own kind of silence, a silence not born of peace, but of memory, a silence that whispered beneath the stone and drifted like ash between old timbers. And Ellis Harlan, lantern in hand, descended once more into its mouth. It was just past dawn. Ash had led him back to the ridge. No rope needed. The horse stood guard as Ellis opened the trapdoor again, the rusted hinges groaning, like something ancient being disturbed. The air was cooler today, more electric, like a storm waiting to be born. He climbed down into the dark and followed the now familiar tunnel, past the charred wall and scattered bones. This time, he didn't stop. Something inside him, some instinct born not of logic but of lineage, pulled him deeper. At the far end, past a collapsed timber support, he found it a narrow side passage half hidden behind loose rock, not caved in, intentionally concealed. He squeezed through. Beyond it lay a chamber, the size of a church hall, the ceiling held by thick beams blackened by time, but still intact. His lantern cast gold light over the walls, and the walls returned its tenfold. Veins of raw gold, thick as his wrist, twisted through the stone like frozen fire. They glimmered in silence, untouched by pick or drill, as though waiting. Ellis staggered back a step, stunned. It wasn't just wealth, it was obscene. He reached out and laid a calloused hand on the seam. The stone was cold, but the gold was warm, almost pulsing. Something about it felt rustling, not evil, but unnatural, beneath his boots. The floor bore strange grooves like cart tracks, but wider, deeper, and symbols carved into the stone. Spirals, triangles, a sun shape, the same patterns he'd seen before, now more deliberate, ritual-like. And there, at the center of the chamber floor, scorched into the rock, was a symbol he could not mistake. A spiral surrounded by what could have been claws or rays of flame. His chest tightened. Ash's scar, the mark on the horse's flank. This wasn't coincidence. This was legacy. He turned, heart pounding, and made his way back to the cabin. Every step uphill, now shadowed with new weight. That night, Ellis lit every lamp he owned and spread the burned papers from the mine across his kitchen table. Most were illegible, but one page held a crude map lines intersecting near El Cielo. Another listed gold weights in meticulous handwriting, pounds, not ounces, ounces, and next to each entry, initials, dozens of them, and many of the names crossed out, not stole, not shipped, erased. Ellis stared long and hard, dread swelling in his gut. This wasn't just a forgotten claim. It was a black operation. Gold pulled illegally, hoarded without tax or ledger. A hidden treasury, buried in the ribs of the mountains by men with more power than conscience. And when the miners learned too much, when they asked for fair wages, or maybe their freedom, they were silenced. The bones hadn't been left behind. They had been sealed in. He remembered the letter, Calloway's words echoing in his mind. It's alive in the stone. It won't open without the guardian. Ash wasn't just a survivor of abuse or war. He was bred or chosen for a purpose, a bloodline of keepers. Ellis stepped outside. The wind had shifted again. Blowing in from the north, Ash stood near the barn, staring up at El Cielo, mane whipping like smoke in the moonlight. Ellis approached slowly. You knew, he said aloud. You weren't lost. You were looking. Ash didn't turn, just flicked one ear back, as if listening. Ellis walked up to him, ran his hand along the animal's side. The spiral scar felt raised, almost warm beneath his fingertips. What kind of horse carries a map in its hide? What kind of man follows it? He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat by the window, rifle across his lap, papers spread before him, every so often glancing toward the hills, half expecting movement in the trees, because now that he knew, others would want to know too. And those men, the ones who sealed that mine, who funded its silence, who used death as a padlock, were likely still alive, likely still rich. And if they even suspected the mine had been found again, he'd never live long enough to cash the first coin. At sunrise, he saddled Ash. Not the mule, not the wagon, just Ash. The horse didn't resist. If anything, he seemed to approve. They rode for 3 hours into town, dust rising like ghosts in their wake. Ellis made straight for the courthouse, the records clerk old, half asleep, and chewing the same piece of tobacco since statehood, looked up as Ellis dropped a folded map and $3 silver onto the counter. I'd like to register a land claim, Ellis said. The clerk arched an eyebrow. That's so. You got the plot number? Ellis pointed at the map. El Cielo Ridge, Southern Fork, 2 miles past Dry Hollow. The clerk squinted. Ain't nothing out there but rocks and whispers. Ellis smiled faintly. That's about what I heard. He paid the fee in silver coins, unmarked, pure, old. The clerk turned them over in his palm. Where'd you dig these up, family? Ellis said. Long time buried. As the papers were stamped and filed, Ellis felt no triumph, just a heavy calm. He had taken the first step, but he knew, with an aching certainty, that someone somewhere had just felt a tremor in their carefully buried past. Because Ash, his quiet, broken, flame-marked horse, had just reopened a wound this land thought long scarred over. And the West never forgets what burned it. It began with a whisper, not in the wind, but in town where whispers tend to turn into trouble. 3 men rode into Dust Creek just past noon. Not drifters, not ranch hands. These men were clean-shaven, dressed in tailored wool and city hats that hadn't tasted dust in years. Their boots were polished, their saddles were custom-tooled, and their eyes, sharp as broken glass, scanned every soul they passed as if measuring value by the second. They didn't say who they were, didn't have to. Men like that don't introduce themselves in places like Dust Creek. They simply start asking questions. The saloon was their first stop. Then the blacksmith. Then old Hiram's feed store. Ever seen a horse with mismatched eyes? White mane, scorched back, scar on the ear, a spiral mark on the flank, like a burn. But shaped, deliberate. Folks shook their heads, others glanced away. One man laughed, thinking it a joke, until he saw the way the men looked at him. Then he spurred up quick. That evening, as shadows stretched across the boardwalks of Dust Creek, the strangers found their answer. Or rather, they stumbled upon the one fool always eager to trade secrets for whiskey, Tommy Greaves. The town drunk, slouched at the far end of the saloon bar, with a shot in hand and fief more in memory. When they bought him another, he leaned in close. You're talking about the burn mark horse, Yeah, I seen it. Funny looking thing. Belongs to that widower out on Red Hollow Road. What's his name? Ellis? Ellis Harlan? Sure about that? One of the men asked. Voice like a blade wrapped in silk. Tommy chuckled. Damn thing walked right through town 2 days back. Would have remembered that face anywhere. Eyes like fire and ice. They left without finishing their drinks. That night, the air over Red Hollow turned thick. A quiet kind of heavy. The way the world gets just before something shifts. Ellis was asleep in his chair. Boots still on. A rifle resting nearby. Ash lay outside the barn, legs tucked beneath him, as still as a carved statue. The wind rustled the dry leaves, and a coyote howled far off. Normal sounds, but then a footstep, soft, careful, too careful. Ash's ears twitched, his eyes opened. He didn't move. Not right away, just listened. Another step, then another. From the east fence line, the horse stood, slowly, silently, every muscle tensed, not fear, readiness, inside the cabin. Ellis stirred. A creak in the floorboards brought him awake. He reached for the rifle before his eyes even opened. Then came the soft scrape of leather against wood. Someone testing the barn door. Ash let out a low, throaty exhale, not a whinny, not a cry. A sound of warning, of possession. Ellis was at the window in 3 seconds. Rifle aimed. Breath steady. He saw movement. 2 figures crouched near the barn. A third near the shed. No lanterns. No sound. He didn't fire. Not yet. Instead, he opened the door slowly, stepped onto the porch, and spoke low but firm. You boys are awful far from town to be sightseeing. Silence. Then, from the dark evening, Mr. Harlan, we were hoping to ask a few questions. Funny time for conversation. Ellis replied. One of them stepped forward into the moonlight. Older, gray at the temples, eyes pale and unblinking. It's about your horse. Which one? The one with the mark. Ellis didn't answer. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That animal doesn't belong to you. Ash stepped into view then, head high, mane catching the moonlight like frost. He moved between Ellis and the strangers, hooves crunching the gravel. Seems he disagrees, Ellis said. The second man reached into his coat. Ash charged, not a gallop, not a wild dash, a calculated lunge, hooves striking hard. Fast. The stranger barely had time to dive aside, as Ash reared and struck the ground where he'd stood. The other 2 backed off quick, drawing steel, but not firing. Ellis raised his rifle. Go ahead. Make me a widower twice over. The older man raised a hand to calm the others. This isn't over, he said coldly. Didn't figure it was. They retreated into the trees, disappearing as quickly as they'd come. Ash stood his ground for a long time after, guarding, watching. Ellis lowered his rifle. We got ourselves a real storm brewing. Boy. Ash didn't flinch, just flicked his tail and kept his eyes on the tree line, as if he'd been waiting for this fight all his life. And maybe he had. The fire started just after midnight. Ellis was in a fitful sleep, the kind that never quite reaches peace. When Ash's scream tore through the stillness like a lightning strike, it wasn't a whinny. It was a war cry, raw, furious, and desperate. He shot out of bed, rifle already in hand, heart punching his ribs. The cabin air smelled of smoke. Flames licked the edges of the barn roof, orange tongues climbing fast. Shadows danced along the wooden slats as a second explosion of splintered wood echoed into the night. Ellis threw open the door just in time to see Ash, still locked inside the burning barn, rear up and slam both hooves into the stall gate. The wood exploded outward, shards flying. Ash charged through the fire like a ghost made of smoke and rage. One of the attackers, face half covered by a bandana, raised a torch toward Ash. Too slow. Ash struck first, hooves colliding with the man's chest. The sound was sickening. The man flew backward, hit the ground with a thud, and didn't rise. 2 others fled into the night. Ellis didn't waste time. Ash, he shouted, his voice hoarse with smoke. Guard the perimeter. Whether the horse understood the words or the urgency, it didn't matter. Ash wheeled around and disappeared into the dark. Eyes glowing. Head low. Ready for another fight. Ellis dove for the back of the barn, where the dirt was freshly disturbed, an odd little square Ash had pawed at just days ago. He dropped to his knees and began to dig, his fingers slicing through hot ash and loose soil. The ground sizzled, scorched by fallen embers. But he kept going until he hit metal, a rusted tin box. He wrenched it free, flipping the latch with shaking hands, inside still dry. Somehow lay the folded parchment deed, Calloway's letter, and the scorched scrap of map. He hugged the box to his chest and turned toward the house, just as another torch was thrown against the porch. The flames caught instantly. No time left. He sprinted for the barn's far side, where Ash reappeared, coated in soot, sides heaving. "Let's go." "Boy," Ellis whispered. "We rete." Ash didn't hesitate. He knelt slightly, just enough for Ellis to scramble onto his back bareback. No saddle, no bridle, just instinct, just rust. They plunged into the dark. Smoke followed them down the valley, curling like a snake's tail behind a dying dream. Ellis didn't look back. Not at the house, not at the fire, not at the man lying broken on the dirt. Ash ran like the night knew his name. Every step was deliberate, every turn measured. He didn't follow the road, didn't hesitate at forks. He chose. They wound through narrow passes and stony gullies that no horse should have remembered, let alone charge through in pitch darkness. The moon vanished behind gathering clouds, yet Ash didn't falter. After what felt like hours, they stopped in a hollow beneath a rock face Ellis didn't recognize. The mountain loomed above them, El Cielo, dark and ancient. Ellis slid off, chest heaving. Ash stood still, looking toward the stone wall. Then he stepped forward and tapped his hoof against a notch near the base of the rock. Once, twice. Ellis stared. There, partially obscured by vines, was a narrow gap in the cliffside, just wide enough for a man or a horse. "You knew," Ellis whispered, voice shaking. Ash turned his head, that mismatched gaze catching the faint moonlight, one eye silver cold, the other warm amber. There was no fear there, only certainty. Ellis lit a match and peered inside the crevice. Dry, safe, sheltered. He led Ash in, then collapsed beside the horse in the dark. The tin box clutched like a lifeline. The adrenaline began to fade. The loss came next. The cabin was gone. The barn gone. Every tool, every piece of history burned to ash. He'd spent 5 years rebuilding from grief. Now, again, he was left with nothing but the clothes on his back. No, not nothing. Ash lay down beside him, flank warm, breathing steady. Ellis rested a hand on the horse's shoulder. You knew where to run, where to hide. You weren't just following instinct. Ash didn't move. You've been here before. The spiral scar on the horse's side caught the matchlight like an ancient brand. You're not just part of the story, Ellis said quietly. You've carried it. Outside, the wind shifted in the silence. Under the shadow of El Cielo, man and horse rested, one carrying the past, the other clinging to a future not yet lost. And somewhere in the dark, danger regrouped. But so did resolve. The sky was just beginning to pale when Ash stirred. His ears twitched toward the cave mouth, and a low, guttural breath rolled from his chest. Outside, the silence was heavy, too still, too quiet. Ellis hadn't slept. He'd sat beside Ash all night, the tin box on his lap, rifle across his knees. The air was cold, but the fire inside him refused to fade. "You're not done yet," Ellis whispered, brushing the soot-stiffened mane. "Neither am I." Ash stood slowly. His body bore ash scars, the char clinging to his blackened back. But his spirit burned clean. He stepped from the cave without waiting for a command, his hooves crunching gravel with purpose. They traveled higher, deeper into the mountains. Ash chose the path, always the path less traveled, through gullies, across creeks, up switchbacks etched by storms and forgotten by men. Hours passed before they reached a narrow ridge, barely wider than a wagon axis haul. Below, the cliffs dropped into shadow. But ahead, something shimmered. Sunlight caught on stone, and the mountain breathed gold. It wasn't a mine, not in the way Ellis expected. No pickaxes, no tunnels, just a cleft in the rock where water trickled through, sparkling like melted treasure. Ash stopped, lowered his head, stamped once. Ellis stepped forward, crouched, and dipped his hand into the stream. It came out heavy with dust fine as flour, gleaming bright, gold. "Untouched this olive." He looked at Ash, and the horse stared back. No triumph, no pride, just the silent truth. This was what had been waiting, what had been guarded. Ellis opened the tin box, took out the old letter. Read again the final line from Calloway. "Only the true guardian will know the blood trail. Only he will not be tempted." Ellis laughed bitterly. "Tempted, I'd sell my own boots for a can of beans." Then he heard it, the snap of a twig behind him. He turned, too slow. A gun cocked, a voice dry, venom slick. "Step away from the stream, Mr. Harlan." 3 men emerged from the trees, suits covered in trail dust, eyes hard, boots dirty but guns clean. The same men from the night of fire. Ellis raised his rifle. "You're trespassing." The oldest smiled. "So are you." Ash moved between them, placing himself at Ellis's side, his breath steady despite the elevation. "You think we didn't follow the man?" said. "That trick in the canyon might have lost us a day. But gold always calls the greedy home. You don't belong here," Ellis said quietly. "No one belongs here," the second man replied. "But now that we've found it, well, the rest's just bookkeeping." The first shot came from Ellis, cracked sharp as dry lightning. One man fell, shoulder torn open. The others dove, returning fire. Ellis dropped to a crouch behind a boulder, Ash beside him, hooves digging in. "Stay down," Ellis growled. "I'll draw them out." But Ash didn't stay down. The horse lunged, darted across the stream in a burst of fury. One of the men tried to aim. Too slow again. Ash struck him down with a shoulder charge that sent the man sprawling into rock. A third gun fired. The sound stopped Ellis's breath. Ash stumbled, his flank darkened, not with soot, but with blood. No, Ellis screamed, rising from cover and firing 2 rounds into the shooter's chest. Peelance fell like dust. Ellis ran to Ash, dropped to his knees. The wound wasn't shallow. Blood pulsed with each heartbeat. The spiral-marked flank he'd come to know shimmered wet. "You saved me," Ellis whispered, pressing his hands against the wound. "You damn beautiful fool." Ash lay down slowly, breath ragged. The water beside him ran gold and red. Ellis looked around. The gold glistened in every crevice, more wealth than he could carry, than 10 men could carry. But as he stared at the stream of molten sunlight, something cracked inside him. He had dreamed of this riches that could change his life, wipe out every debt, buy back every piece of dignity lost to time. But now, standing beside the creature that had given everything to protect him, It all rang hollow. He knelt beside the stream, picked up a chunk of raw gold. It was heavy, dazzling, but it hadn't stood with him in fire, hadn't stared down a gun, hadn't chosen to stay when it could have run. He looked back at Ash, lying still, chest rising weakly. Those strange eyes, one ash gray, one amber fire, watched him without pleading. Only trust, peelant, sacred trust. "You're no miracle," Ellis whispered. "You're proof. Proof that something broken can still protect. That something scarred can still choose to love." He dropped the gold into the stream. Let it be carried away with the rest of the world's noise. Then, with hands trembling, he took off his coat and pressed it gently against Ash's side. None of it mattered. He took off his coat, wrapped Ash's side, murmuring comforts he didn't believe. "Hold on. Just hold on." He thought of the claim, of the cabin lost, of the men who would keep coming. But most of all, he thought of this horse, this broken, burned creature who had carried him not just through land but through fire, grief, purpose. Ellis stood, looked at the stream once more. He left the goldie. He lifted Ash's head gently, kissed the star-shaped scar beneath his ear. "Let's go home, old friend," he whispered. "What's left of it." He tore strips from his shirt, tied them to make reins. Ash tried to rise and failed, but Ellis wouldn't let him fall. He knelt, shoulder under the horse's neck, whispering, pushing. Together, inch by inch, they began to mull. Ellis didn't go back to the golden stream. He couldn't. Not after what Ash had done. Not after the blood and the silence that followed. Instead, when dawn split the ridgeline and painted the peaks in pale fire, he retraced old steps not for wealth, but for memory. The cave, that cleft in the rock where, once upon a fire and a gunshot, he'd found a tin box buried beneath ash and time. Ash had taken him there first, and now, the same horse bandaged, limping, but alive, walked beside him. Slower, yes, but steady. And though Ellis held the reins, it was still Ash who led. The entrance looked the same, half swallowed by weeds and forgetting. The soot marks still stained the stone, and the air inside was cool with reverence. They moved through the narrow shaft, Ash pausing once to sniff a scorched timber beam. And at the far end, buried beneath the same fallen rocks and broken wood, Ellis found the tin box again, rusted at the edges, but locked tight. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, were 4 small gold bars. No stamps, no dates, no names. Just weight. Not treasure. Not like the river. But enough. Enough to buy back what mattered most. 3 weeks later, the deed was signed. Ellis Harlan stood on the courthouse steps of Dust Creek, a legal claim in one hand. The same banker who once scoffed now shook his hand with reluctant respect. "You're the legal owner of Harlan Ridge now, Mr. Harlan." Ellis nodded, saying nothing. Soot still lined his nails, and his limp remained. Ash waited at the hitching post outside, his coat glinting in the morning sun, scars and all. The people in town no longer stared with mockery. Now, it was curiosity, maybe even awe. The spiral scar on his flank, once a mark of ridicule, was now legend, whispered between children, and muttered in saloons. The horse with the fire's mark, who guarded a man and a mountain. That winter, Ellis rebuilt the barn, not with polished beams or fancy roofing, but with steady hands and strong purpose. Above Ash's stall, he carved into the main beam, "Some things can't be bought." Ash's strength returned slowly. His gait would never be perfect again. But that didn't matter. He hadn't outlived his story. Each day, Ellis worked the land sowing seed, mending fences, patching what time had worn thin. Sometimes strangers came asking about the silver vein or the gold tricia. Ellis would just lean against a post, arms folded, silent. Sometimes silence speaks louder than bullets. But most nights, it was just Ellis and Ash, sitting atop the ridge, watching the stars spill across the velvet sky. Hasty Ash beside him, one ear twitching, breath slow and steady. Ellis sipped coffee from his old tin mug, boots dusty, and whispered things he'd never told another soul, not even God. That he still remembered Clara's laughter, that the land still called her name when the wind blew just right, that he hadn't known he still had it in him to choose what was right until a broken horse refused to leave him behind. The gold stayed buried, but the story of the horse didn't. People came, some to see Ash, some to buy him. Ellis just smiled. Not for sale. One man offered $1,000. Ellis didn't blink. He kept the tin box buried beneath the hearthstone. A reminder, a line between what he needed and what he once thought he wanted. The years passed. Scars on the land faded. Trees returned. Crops thrived. And the name Harlan came to mean more than dust and tragedy. It came to mean a man who chose soul over silver. A man saved by a creature the world had given up on. In the 5th spring after the fire, Ash didn't rise with the sun. Ellis found him lying in the tall grass, eyes closed, legs folded neat beneath him, as if he'd fallen asleep stargazing. He knelt beside him, laid a hand on the old horse's neck, and let the silence soak into his bones. Ash had lived longer than most would have dared hope, fought harder than any beast had a right to, and when he died, he still looked as he always had, half ruin, half miracle. Ellis buried him on the ridge, overlooking El Cielo, beneath the tallest cypress. He placed a stone at the head, no carving, didn't need one. The earth already knew. And some stories, whispered by wind and fire, are better left written in silence. They say there's a place in El Cielo where the wind doesn't blow quite right, where the grass grows in spirals, and if you're quiet, real quiet, you might hear hoofbeats in the dirt, long after the sun's gone. Old folks talk of a man who lived alone on a ridge, said he owned the richest vein of gold in 3 counties, but never mind a drop after the fire. Said he used to sit with a horse beside them, one ear torn, eyes like sky and flame, a beast too strange to live and too true to forget. Some say the horse still rides, just a ghost now, watching over that ridge, waiting for the next soul lost enough to follow fire over fortune. But between you and me, maybe that wasn't a ghost. Maybe that was the last true guardian the West ever knew. The last reminder that some gold don't glitter and some heroes ain't human. And now I ask you not as a viewer, but as a traveler, if it were you, alone, broke, standing at the mouth of a cave, would you follow the gold or the ghost?